I didn't like you, as my son-in-law had no idea I owned the hotel chain he managed as regional director. He always saw me as a broke old man who fixed his own gutters and drove a truck older than his marriage. One evening, he invited me to a private dinner to celebrate his big promotion, and I accepted, wanting to see exactly how his parents would treat a poor man. They showed their true colors the moment they slid a thick envelope across the table, offering to pay me to disappear from my daughter's wedding photos and her life. 5 minutes later, I made one phone call, and the ground underneath their entire fortune began to crack. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe arrogance always sends the bill due eventually, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. The wind off Lake Erie cut through my old canvas coat like it wasn't even there as I stood outside Marchetti's, the kind of steakhouse where the valets don't make eye contact with anybody driving less than an SUV. I'd parked my truck 4 blocks away, same as always, because I didn't need an audience for the walk-in. I'm 64 years old. My name is Walter Pruitt, and I've spent my whole life understanding one simple fact. Money that talks loud is usually money that's scared of being questioned. Real money just sits quiet and lets fools underestimate it. My daughter Melissa was the reason I put on a collared shirt and drove into the city that night. She'd married Derek 3 years back, and from the very first dinner, I clocked him. Not a bad kid, exactly worse. A calculating one. He measured every person at a table by their watch, their shoes, the way they held a wine list. He treated me the way you treat a stray dog that wandered onto your porch. Tolerated, never welcomed. He believed I was a retired maintenance man scraping by on a pension and a paid-off house in Parma. He had no idea that the hotel group he worked for, the one that had just made him regional operations director for their entire Midwest division, belonged to me. I'd built Highgate Hospitality Group from a single roadside motel outside Toledo into 41 properties across 6 states. And 10 years ago, I'd folded my name into a trust so airtight that not even the board knew whose signature was really behind it. I wanted Melissa loved for who she was, not for what she'd inherit. So I never corrected Derek's assumption. Not once. That night, his parents, Gordon and Vivian, were flying in from Naples, Florida, to celebrate his promotion, and Derek invited me the way you invite a coworker. You're required to include a call that lasted 90 seconds and ended with him saying, "Just try not to be late, okay?" I told him I wouldn't be. The hostess looked at my boots first, my coat second, my face third. She led me to the private room in the back like she was walking me to detention. Gordon and Vivian were already seated, dressed like they'd stepped out of a yacht club catalog. Derek sat between them, swirling a glass of wine he hadn't earned the taste for yet. Nobody stood up when I walked in. Nobody offered a hand. Derek just pointed with his glass toward the empty chair at the far end, like he was seating a delivery driver. Melissa wasn't there yet fixing her makeup, Derek said, not looking at me. I sat down in the silence, and the assault started before the bread even came out. Vivian leaned forward, diamonds catching the low light, and asked how my little house in Parma was holding up, emphasizing little the way you'd talk about a shoebox. She complained about the cost of heating their Naples place, their new one in Aspen too, while she was at it. Gordon jumped in about their 6 weeks in the Amalfi Coast, then looked at my hands rough, calloused, a plumber's hands, a builder's hands, and asked what exactly I used to do for a living before I retired to whatever this is. I told him the truth, just not the whole truth. I told him I spent my life in property maintenance, fixing what was broken, keeping buildings standing. Technically true. I just left out the part where I owned the buildings. Gordon let out a short laugh and traded a look with Vivian, the kind of look that closes a case before the jury's even seated. Derek shifted in his seat, red-faced, humiliated by proximity to me. And still, I said nothing. I drank my water and watched them dig, patient as a man who already knows where the shovel's going to end up. Then Gordon set down his fork, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a crisp envelope. He slid it across the table until it stopped against my plate. The room went dead quiet. I looked at it, then at him, and asked what it was. He told me there was a check inside for $15,000. A transition fund, he called it. The condition was simple. I was to tell Melissa I'd decided to move to a retirement community somewhere warm, somewhere far, and I was to remove myself gently and permanently from her life. No calls, no holidays, no walking her down any future aisle a second time if things didn't work out with her sister's kids. He said a man who wore work boots to a promotion dinner was, in his words, a weight Derek can't keep carrying as he climbs. He said my simplicity embarrassed his son's rising position. I didn't touch the envelope. I turned to Derek and asked him directly if he agreed with this, if he wanted his own wife's father paid off and erased. Derek looked me dead in the eye, and something in his face had already decided. He said his career needed a certain image now, that a director overseeing luxury properties couldn't be photographed next to a father-in-law who looked like the guy who fixes the ice machine. He told me to take the money and do what was best for everyone. That's when Melissa walked back in, bright-eyed, asking if we'd ordered yet. I slid the envelope into my coat before she could see it, and Gordon and Vivian exchanged a small, victorious glance. They thought I'd folded. I looked at my daughter, kind, unguarded, completely unaware of what had just been decided about her life at this table, and I did not raise my voice. I did not flip a single plate. Anger's for men with no other cards to play, and I was holding the whole deck. I stood, pulled a $1 bill from my wallet, smoothed it flat, and set it in the center of my empty plate. I told Derek that covered my water. I told Melissa I had a headache coming on, kissed her forehead, told her to enjoy the evening, and I walked out into the cold. The second those brass doors closed behind me, the tired old man I'd been playing for 2 hours disappeared. My spine straightened. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a long time. Pruitt picked up on the first ring, my attorney, and the one person on this earth who knew exactly what sat behind Highgate Hospitality's ownership structure. I didn't bother with hello. I told her they'd taken the bait. I told her to open a full forensic audit on every account Derek had touched since he got that director title, starting yesterday. She asked if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Then I got in my truck and drove toward downtown, because the hunt had officially begun, and I intended to take their whole fraudulent little kingdom apart brick by brick. The Highgate corporate offices sat on the 18th floor of a glass tower. Most people driving past assumed belonged to some tech company. I parked in my reserved spot underground, reserved under a shell name. Nobody questioned anymore and took the private elevator up. Priya was already waiting with coffee going cold on the conference table and a stack of files thick enough to stop a bullet. She'd been my lawyer for 26 years, ever since I turned one battered motor lodge into a chain that stretched from Cleveland to Nashville. I built it after my wife Diane died of a stroke at 39, left me alone with a 4-year-old and a mortgage I could barely make. I bought that first motel at a bankruptcy auction with money I didn't have, worked the front desk myself at 2 a.m. so I wouldn't have to pay a night clerk, kept Melissa asleep in a playpen behind the counter because daycare wasn't in the budget. I turned one motel into 6, 6 into 20, 20 into 41, and 10 years ago, when my heart started acting up under the stress of running it all in the open, I folded my ownership into an irrevocable trust and disappeared from the public record entirely. Priya became the face. I became a ghost who mowed his own lawn. 2 years ago, the board hired Derek off a flashy resume and a confident handshake, completely unaware he was about to marry the daughter of the man whose signature secretly controlled the whole company. He looked at my truck, my house, my hands, and decided I was nothing. He had no idea the empire funding his tailored suits belonged to the man he'd just tried to buy off with $15,000 of his parents' laundered money. I dropped the envelope on the table in front of Priya and told her it was time to lift the veil on the trust, reinstate my name, give me full access. She typed a sequence into her secure laptop, and a soft chime confirmed it. Walter Pruitt was, on paper again, exactly who he'd always secretly been. But exposing myself was step one. I needed to know what Derek had actually been doing with his hands on my company for 2 years. I told Priya to bring in the forensic team. For 2 straight days, a sharp accountant named Renata Cole and her crew tore through Derek's authorization codes, his vendor contracts, his signing history. Renata founded on the second night a network of shell vendors, fake renovation contractors, who billed Highgate for work that never happened on properties Derek personally oversaw. Nearly $3 million over 18 months, routed through invoices for phantom lobby remodels and HVAC replacements that were never installed. The guests at our Nashville property had been sweating through broken air conditioning for a full summer, while Derek billed the company for units that were sitting in a warehouse he'd never opened. Renata kept pulling threads. The shell companies traced to consulting fees paid out to 2 familiar names, Gordon and Vivian Pruitt. No, not Pruitt. Hargrove, their names, sitting right there on wire transfers as hospitality design consultants. despite neither of them having designed so much as a hallway. Their 6 weeks in Amalfi, their Aspen condo, their new matching Range Rovers. All of it, paid for with money, bled straight out of my company, out of the pockets of housekeepers and desk clerks who depended on Highgate staying solvent to feed their own kids. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something cold and precise settle where the rage had been. I told Priya I didn't just want Derek fired. Firing him would be mercy. And mercy wasn't on the table anymore, not after that envelope, not after what they tried to buy from me at my own daughter's expense. I told her to prepare for a full federal referral and to trace every asset Gordon and Vivian had bought with stolen company money, because when this came down, I wanted it to come down on all three of them at once. Then Renata found something that changed the temperature of the whole room. A memo. Derek was planning to push through a capital restructuring at the company's annual gala in 10 days, using the chaos of a public rebrand announcement to quietly transfer several million more into an account before quietly resigning for personal reasons and vanishing. Overseas with Gordon and Vivian, already holding tickets to a country with no extradition treaty. He wasn't just stealing, he was planning to disappear, and he was planning to take Melissa's future with him. 3 nights later, my doorbell rang at 11 p.m., and my daughter was standing on my porch in the rain, soaked through, shaking, mascara running. She didn't say anything. She just fell into my arms the way she used to when she was 7 and scared of thunder. Inside, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, she told me her cards had all been declined at the grocery store that afternoon. When she called Derek, he didn't apologize. He screamed at her, called her financially reckless, said he'd frozen the joint accounts to teach her discipline. Then, an hour before she showed up at my door, he'd come home and thrown a stack of papers on the kitchen island, demanding she sign over the small trust her late mother, my Diane, had left her, the only money in this world that had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with Highgate, just a mother's love for a daughter she didn't live to see grow up. Derek claimed he needed it for a bridge loan on a lake house. When Melissa hesitated, he told her their marriage was over unless she signed by morning. I sat there listening to my daughter cry and understood the whole shape of it instantly. Derek wasn't buying a lake house. He was scraping together every last dollar he could grab before running. He was going to drain the company, drain my daughter's inheritance, and vanish, leaving her with nothing and no explanation. Every instinct in me wanted to tell her everything right there at that kitchen table, who I really was, what I really controlled, that her husband was about to be buried under federal charges. But Melissa didn't need a corporate war in that moment. She needed her father. I told her she wasn't going back to that house tonight, or any night. I told her to ignore every call from Derek. I told her, in a voice that left no room for argument, that by the end of next week, he would never be able to hurt her again. She didn't ask how a man who fixed his own gutters was going to take down a hotel executive. She just believed me because I'd never once given her a reason not to. The next morning, I signed the paperwork to freeze every executive account tied to Derek's authorization, effective immediately, though he wouldn't know it yet. By 9 a.m., the Highgate leadership team was in a full panic. Emails flying, nobody understanding why the silent trust had suddenly slammed its fist on the table. I had Priya schedule a mandatory shareholder disclosure meeting, not on some quiet Tuesday, but during the gala Derek had planned as his own coronation. He'd be legally required to host the very event that ended him. Then Priya picked up the phone and called a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Cleveland. She laid out the shell vendors, the phantom invoices, the wire transfers to Gordon and Vivian. It didn't take much convincing. The paper trail did the talking. A tactical team agreed to be stationed quietly around the gala venue, waiting for my signal. Wednesday afternoon, I was in aisle 6 of Denton's Hardware, loading 40-pound bags of mulch onto a cart, wearing the same faded canvas coat I always wore, when a voice I recognized sliced through the quiet of the store. Gordon and Vivian, wildly out of place in cashmere and pearls, had apparently gotten lost looking for some upscale garden center and wandered in by mistake. Gordon spotted me immediately, nudged Vivian, and steered her over loud enough for the whole front of the store to hear. He told me it was fitting to see me hauling dirt like a common laborer, said it was exactly the kind of life I was destined for now that his son ran a real company. Vivian chimed in, said she hoped I'd enjoy my quiet little retirement while they toasted to Derek's rise at the gala this weekend, wearing the new jewelry she'd bought, jewelry I now knew, purchased with money stolen from housekeepers' overtime and vendor contracts that never got paid. I stood there and let them talk. I let them dig their own grave with their own mouths, the way arrogant people always do when they think no one's keeping score. I paid the cashier, an older man named Hank I'd known for a decade, told him to keep the change for his grandkids, and wheeled my cart past Gordon and Vivian without another word. The storm was 3 days out, and I was ready to let it wash the whole thing away. Saturday night, the Highgate Anniversary Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Ritz downtown with crystal, orchids, and old money pretending to be older than it was. I'd spent the hour before pressing a navy suit I hadn't worn in a decade. The suit I'd bought the day I stepped back from the public side of the company, the armor of a man who used to run boardrooms before he chose a quieter life. Pruitt confirmed the federal team was in place, invisible in the service corridors. I walked in through the side entrance and watched from the mezzanine as Derek held court below, champagne in hand, laughing with board members, completely unaware his corporate cards had been dead for 24 hours. Gordon and Vivian floated through the crowd like royalty. Vivian's new necklace catching the chandelier light, Gordon bragging to a city councilman about investments that didn't exist. At exactly the right moment, I walked down the stairs and pushed through the ballroom doors. The string quartet faltered. Heads turned. The older board members who remembered the name Walter Pruitt from 20 years back went pale first. Derek's smile cracked when he saw me, confusion turning to panic as the posture, the suit, the total absence of fear didn't match the man he thought he'd bought off with $15,000. Gordon and Vivian reached me first, furious, demanding to know how I'd slipped past security. Vivian hissed that I was an embarrassment, that I should crawl back to my little house. Derek shoved between them, reminded me I'd signed away my rights, threatened to have security drag me out. He snapped his fingers at the head of security, a man I'd personally hired years earlier, and ordered him to remove me. The guard's hand never reached my shoulder. Priya stepped out of the shadows beside me, and the second he recognized her as the trust's legal counsel, he froze, then stepped back and lowered his head. Derek's whole understanding of the room's power structure shattered in real time. Priya walked to the stage, tapped the microphone, and called the mandatory shareholder disclosure meeting to order. She announced that the anonymous founder of Highgate Hospitality had chosen tonight, after a decade of silence, to step forward. She pointed straight at me. I walked up, took the podium, and opened the folder. The screens behind me lit up with wire transfers, shell vendor invoices, and the phantom renovation contracts that had left real guests sweating through broken air conditioning while Derek billed the company for equipment that never existed. I laid it out piece by piece, the $3 million in stolen funds, the consulting fees paid to Gordon and Vivian Hargrove, the tickets already purchased to a country with no extradition treaty. I watched the color drain out of three faces at once. Derek lunged for the stage, screaming that it was fabricated, that I was insane, begging the board not to listen. Gordon tried to bolt for a side exit and walked straight into two federal agents who'd been posted there for an hour. Vivian collapsed near the ice sculpture, sobbing, as an agent unclasped the necklace from her neck and dropped it into an evidence bag. I fired Derek from the podium, in front of every board member and investor who mattered to him, and told him he'd never set foot in a Highgate property again, except as a visitor with an escort. Then I raised my hand, and the federal team moved in. Handcuffs. A parade of disgrace out through the same doors Gordon and Vivian had walked through like royalty an hour earlier. I found Melissa near the back, pale, shaking, having watched the whole thing unfold from the shadows. I didn't rush the explanation. I just opened my arms, and she came apart in them the way she had on my porch in the rain. Later, once the ballroom had emptied, I told her everything, why I'd hidden it, why I wanted her loved for herself and not for what she'd inherit, and how sorry I was that my silence had left a blind spot Derek had crawled through. She cried, but they weren't the same tears as before. They were the sound of a weight finally leaving her chest. 6 months later, Derek took a federal plea deal on wire fraud and embezzlement and was sentenced to 8 years. Gordon and Vivian lost everything the government could trace to stolen funds, the Naples condo, the Range Rovers, the jewelry. Their fake friends stopped answering calls within a week of the story hitting the local news. Last I heard, they were splitting a one-bedroom apartment outside Akron, blaming each other for all of it, learning at 60-something what the rest of us learn a lot earlier, that a life built on someone else's labor collapses the second the labor stops showing up. These mornings, I sit on my porch in Parma with a cup of gas station coffee, and most days, Melissa comes out and sits beside me before her shift at the community center where she works now, finding her own footing on her own terms. She asked me once why I don't buy a bigger house, now that she knows what I'm actually worth. I told her a house is wood and drywall, but a home is where I marked her height on the kitchen door frame every August until she left for college, and no amount of money buys that back if you sell it off for something shinier. The business runs fine without me standing in the lobby. Priya handles it with the same precision she always has, and the profits go back into the people who actually earn them now, not into somebody's stolen yacht fund. I've learned, the long way, that the people who mistake kindness for weakness are usually the ones standing closest to the edge without knowing it. Real strength doesn't need to raise its voice, and it definitely doesn't need a tailored suit to prove a point. It just needs patience and the willingness to let arrogant people talk long enough to convict themselves. If this one hit home for you, tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's always another storm coming for the people who think quiet means weak.